Anyone?
I'm good, Don, thank you.
Okay,
Is
gotcha.
this your dinner?
Yes.
Mine is sitting in the car. I ate part of it.
John Strange today.
Yes. Hit the red button. Hit the red button.
Yes, it is. 8:42.
8:42, good God.
We'll start study session.
Yes. This study session is solely focused on something you've had as an information item a couple of times, but it's the idea of our security becoming a Washington Township police force. Mr. Klaus responded to the previous information items by providing me some documents, and what I'd like to do is just to open it up to board members for questions based upon, the materials that he's prepared. They're drafts, it's first go round of these drafts, and just to make clear, if we move forward with a recommendation at any time, it would be approving us to move forward with the formal planning. So it wouldn't be approving like the documents you see tonight and things like that, because that does take time, but it would be us giving a green light to go forward with the planning. So with that, I'd like to open it up to board members to ask questions so that we can meet your needs through this study session.
I sent a document along. I don't know if you got it, Mr. Klaus.
I did send I believe it, one board member sent some
I've got
inquiries, and I said
I've
we
had
prepared to
Dr.
speak to
Hills.
these.
I had forwarded a couple of questions.
I sent 5,
You sent it to me?
yes. Copy of the president. Oops. Yeah, because I was just CC'd you.
Yesterday.
I can send these if it would be easier, Mr. Klaus. It gives you.
You can just ask it,
Okay.
and we can just go through the questions. That may be the easiest.
Obviously, I don't want to just monopolize the time, so I'll just ask the first one. First question, and I come with these questions, I'm just going to say it now, out of a position of love and respect. So I think, and I know we're not supposed to, as a board, evaluate people, but I very much value, Mr. Klaus, everything that you're doing, and I love the way that security feels in the township now, and I like the continued emphasis, as with other departments and folks, on continuous improvement. I mean, you're not one of those people that says, I'm not going to damn well change it. So I like even the spirit that things come from, but I do have some pretty big questions in my mind, which does not indicate a bias or prejudice against this, but it indicates some things that I'm concerned about. Acknowledging you and your efforts and your hard work. I mean, I really mean that. I want you to know that.
And I absolutely acknowledge that, and it's wonderful to work with a board that cares enough, because I've been around another township that doesn't, or hadn't in the past. So this is, I understand totally, and I appreciate that.
These are, and I've stated these as questions because that is what they are for me. What is your assessment as to why so few school corporations have started their own police departments, despite the fact that Indiana law has permitted school corporations to do this for some time? I'm not sure exactly how many years, but it seems like it's been a while. And then the follow-up, or the remainder of that is, we were informed in a previous study session that more school corporations are likely to start their own departments. Why is this so, and what has changed? And just give you a little subtext. I almost have a feeling that there's been, I'm not saying with you, obviously, but there are meetings, superintendents have meetings, IASBO exists, all these other, and I picture a meeting having occurred where people go, get your people to do this because it's a damn good idea. And so I think I've heard the rationale, which is from some of my other questions, but I'd like to know more about that.
And it's an excellent question, because the statute has been around since late 2006, 2007. And actually, we did have, I believe, Pike Township was the first that took advantage of that. Since then, others have followed suit. I think a lot of it was initially from just in my dealings with the Marion County Safe School Commission. I think dealing with my counterparts around central Indiana is that the core of personnel in positions such as I am is improving quite a bit. I think this is a natural evolution from maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, and of course Columbine, San Diego, all of these other cumulative events have caused school districts to hire better and better people. And along with that now comes a realization, hey, we have this tool now, and we have personnel in place that can put these type of things together with experience and with knowledge. So I think that may lead, it's totally anecdotal, that's just my feeling and my perceptions in 3.5, almost 4 years into this now. I think you're starting to see a flurry of activity, especially when you have the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy's executive director. He won't go on paper with it, but he highly suggests that this is the route school corporations take. And that's for reasons, and I'll get into that regarding your question, Dr. Hill, about the newest Senate Bill 85 and the SRO versus school police officer. I think, in December, Senator Grove just turned, Warren turned last week to a school corporation police department. Perry's hit me up. Dave Stalcup down there, my counterpart down there, has approached me. They're looking into it now. I think Franklin Township already is. So the townships, Lawrence, I do know, is looking at it now. I was very surprised because I didn't think they were looking at it. I thought they were looking at it very much like Carmel does, using from their town police department or city police department. But I think Lawrence, after talking with them, they were moving forward until their superintendent retired. And the sense I get, they may revisit that because it appears, again, from talking
He's
with my...
from Pike, and Soup's from Pike,
So-
they'll be moving forward.
Yeah, so, thank you, Dr. Woodson. Yeah, so, and that's my feeling there. So, I think the statute, that's the long answer. The short answer is, I believe there hasn't been the personnel to pull all of this together and do it in a way to make it professional, responsible, mitigation of liability, all of those things that go along with that. And then two, now we're starting to see other entities push this. The ILEA, the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy, recently, and Dr. Spanrotti was in a meeting where Gary Coons, the Director of Homeland Security, also urged school districts to be looking at this as an option. And I think as we discuss Senate Bill 85, this will become even more apparent why this may start accelerating even more, because there's some inherent problems with this bill.
Which bill again, I'm sorry?
Senate Bill 85. It
The SRO.
redefined the SRO, and it made it worse.
And just a follow-up question, and then, like I said, I'll be true to my pledge and not ask all these questions right now, wait for others, but do you feel comfortable saying anything when this meeting's being recorded, or would you prefer to talk offline, if you will, about why the director of the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy or the person you were speaking about won't, as you mentioned it, already,
Right.
won't go on paper, so to speak?
In my, I think with any state agency, they don't want to go on record with this kind of recommendation, just inviting, what if things go haywire, what if things go wrong? We're recommending this, but you get the wrong person in place, and things turn sour. Does that come back on that state agency? I think that's the crux of the whole thing.
It's
So,
odd in a state that wants to have teachers carrying guns, that they give a damn about that.
yeah.
I posed two questions, basically. One was just if Mr. Klaus could give us some sense of how often, how many times in whatever the past few years have we lost our SROs being pulled for, other duty due to unfortunate events. And then one of the areas that I had the biggest concern, or probably lack of information, is shifting an SRO to a police officer, what that does in the relationship to investigations. An SRO talking with a student is, in a room, so to speak, is very different than a police officer talking to a student in a room if there's no one in there. So any information you could provide on
Okay.
either or both of those would be helpful.
I pulled my officers. I have 3 that have been on for the longest period of time. We've had some turnover at West Lane and finally have a good fit there, and just added a new one, which we stole from Pike. And so I basically pulled my two senior members, lead SRO Dexter Crouch and Freddie Edwards, and we took a look at what have we done the past few years. And we have counted numerous events. I counted at least 24 events over the past couple of years that have occurred. And when I say events, some of these events have been a day or two. Now, the question you presented to us was about officers covering standard officer duties. And it goes beyond that because, let me just start with that. The coverage, I'll give you for instance, very recently we had Officer Bradway that lost his life in the line of duty. We lost all our officers plus a lot of our part-time. It was just amazing we were able to pull off what we pulled off that day. Before that we had Officer David Moore. Same thing happened. So with those obviously, today we were very fortunate. That wasn't a full-blown deal, so we didn't have to worry about that too much. But in those instances, we're going to lose. I just, when something happens, I kind of gird myself because I know it's coming. But what also plays out is when I first started here, I thought the right thing to do would be to hire reserve officers as our employees full-time. And those officers would derive their powers, obviously, as reserve officers for their particular department. There's some inherent problems with that, but it got us from point A to point B in a hurry where we needed to be, and which brings us where we're at the table now, the next evolution of that. The problem with that is now that I've got Officer Freddie Edwards at Northview that works Tuesdays and Thursday nights covering shifts on the street so that the tax shift and late shift officers can then go and do community-oriented policing. They can do focus patrols. They can do the community meetings. They can do all of these other things. So although it doesn't pull him from Northview, he works till sometimes 2 or 3 in the morning, and he comes in dragging tail, and that's probably not the best scenario that we'd like. So that's why I say it kind of goes beyond that.
Sure.
There are other days that IMPD and we're beholden to their training schedule. When I lose an officer to firearms training, Freddie had to go in January, late January, and then that of course got booted and with the weather, but recently had to do that. So I lose an officer, I have to hire a part-time officer to come in and cover that. The idea is that we would be able to control our training, control our schedule to break summertime. Summertime would be obviously the big time, much like professional staff. So you have not only the events, but you've got, or the special events, but you have the Brickyard, which doesn't affect us too bad. The Race in May has in the past, not too bad, but it has. And now we're adding another race, the Grand Prix, and I'm not sure where that's the wild card. I don't know what kind of staffing is going to come out of that. You have the Summer Expo you have, which really drains us because we need the officers in summer school. We don't use part-time. And when I lose them, I've got Dexter Crouch doing park ranger detail. He does the Monon detail. They all have to put anywhere from 32 to 40 hours in a month for their reserve duties. And we're beholden to that because we utilize those police powers. So it's a lot of give and take, and there's been some stressful times when we have worried about coverage. But I would say over the last couple of years, there's been about 20 to 24 times we've been 1 or 2 short because of an event of training or an officer having to work so late that there's no possible way they can do their regular shift.
And for
here.
1 or 2, that's significant. Doesn't sound like a lot quantity-wise, but for the work they do, that's quite significant.
We were short at least 1 home football game, which that's amplified. There being 1 or 2 short there because you only need 1 incident, and then you don't have people patrolling the crowds because it takes two to detain somebody. So you can get shorthanded pretty quick.
And I'm glad you brought that up because we did have an instance last year. Our former West Lane officer was a deputy reserve, and the reserves were asked to cover a detail on the Friday night of our football game. They could not get enough people, so they canceled. If they were working somewhere else, they canceled it and said you couldn't do it. You had to come work reserves. So in that instance, we lost an officer. It was only for 4 hours. It wasn't school day, But as Dr. Milliman alluded to, that's, you know, all our officers work, that's a big deal to us. Those graduation's the biggest deal. Football games are a big deal. Basketball's a big deal. And we make sure we have the manpower to cover that, and that left us slightly shorthanded on that event.
What was your second one?
The other was dealing with an SRO talking with a kid
Oh, right.
versus a police officer.
And this is an interesting question, because Senate Bill 85, as I had talked about earlier, has caused a great deal of confusion, and this is one reason the Law Enforcement Academy is really pushing or suggesting to go to this new model. Senate Bill 85 took out the line employed by a school corporation at the front end. A school resource officer is employed by, they struck it, they got rid of it. And now it says defined as an officer assigned to a school corporation to carry out additional responsibilities assigned to the SRO under an employment engagement contract or MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. So now we've got an issue, because July 1st, the officer I hired from Pike under the new grant won't be an SRO according to this, because he's not a member of any law enforcement agency. So not only with that, and I'm trying to give a little bit of a prelude, because as I get into this, it'll start gelling and making some sense. The other thing about the SRO bill in 85, it specifically says in the statute that the duties are to protect against outside threats to physical safety of students, prevent unauthorized access, and secure schools against violence and natural disasters. I think you'll agree with me, all three of those duties sound like law enforcement duties rather than school resource officer duties. Now, I bring that up because the School Corporation Law 2026-16 in existing Indiana code under police officer responsibility says specifically, such police officers shall enforce and assist the educators and administrators of their school corporation in the enforcement of rules and regulations of the school corporation. This is one the legislature got right. 1 out of 100 ain't bad, but it'll do. So I bring that up because the seminal case in Indiana occurred in 2007. It's the Indiana Court of Appeals, and they denied transfer over to the Indiana Supreme Court because it was cut and dried. And it really plays into our hands because the case, TSV State, was an IPS school police officer. And this one is really beyond what we normally do, which is even better because it really helps give some definition. And for Mr. Kite, I've got the site on that, 863 Northeast 2nd, 362.
Thank you very much.
Indiana Court of Appeals, 2007. So the IPS school police officer receives an anonymous tip. He's over at Broad Ripple High School, gets a call. Hey, TS has got a baggie of marijuana in his right pocket. That's all they get. And so the IPS officer assigned to Broad Ripple goes to the gym class that TS is in, says, come with me. So by all rights, he's seized, whether by a school resource officer, by a law enforcement officer. That constitutes a seizure, and the court discusses that and says, yes, it is. So they lead him to the locker room, tell him to change. He changes, put on his pants, and the officer says, what do you have in your pockets? Anything I need to know about? TS pulls out a baggie of marijuana. The officer then goes back into his pocket and retrieves a second baggie of marijuana. The initial intent of the officer was, we're going to find this one and take him down to the dean's office, but now we've got the substantial amount. We've kind of crossed that line of school rules, and now we're toying with a violation of drug law. So the question was, first, was TS a seizure? Obviously, the court found that was. However, they also looked at TLO versus New Jersey, and that's the federal case everybody is so familiar with. TLO still controls in this jurisdiction. Indiana, even though Indiana's constitution verbatim is, with search and seizure, is verbatim with federal, Indiana looks at reasonableness. That's a big deal.
Right.
The forefathers looked at reasonableness, and that's how the courts have really gone with this. So with that in mind, TLO versus New Jersey is a two-pronged test. Whether the action was justified upon its inception. Was the search justified upon its inception? That is satisfied if there is reasonable grounds for suspecting that the search will turn up evidence that the student is violated or violating rules of the school. So, and I want to say that because, remember, 2026-16, such police officers shall enforce and assist educators and administrators of enforcement of rules and regulations. Right there in black and white, you've got the direction from the legislature that is contained in TLO versus New Jersey. So it's satisfied if there's a reasonable grounds for suspecting the search will turn up evidence related to that school violation. Second prong of that, was the search reasonably related in scope to the circumstances which justify that interference? It's satisfied if the measures adopted are reasonably related to the objectives of the search and not excessively intrusive. So the court then said, okay, we've got TLO versus New Jersey. And now let's go to Indiana. What are we doing in Indiana? They looked at Myers v. Indiana, a Supreme Court case here in Indiana in 2005. They actually had a three-pronged test, but they used that as persuasive information, so as not to disturb the TLO decision. And Myers helps give us direction, and this is the long answer, the long way to get to your question. School officials, one of the tests was school officials initiating the search or police involvement is minimal. That would be the reasonableness standard. What happens if a search is conducted by the SRO on its own initiative to further educationally related goals, enforcing school rules, that type of thing? Again, the reasonableness standard stands with Myers. And then third, when an outside police officer initiates a search for investigative purposes, obviously that standard becomes probable cause and the warrant requirement under the Fourth Amendment. There's other jurisdictions that this TS court looked at. Florida, for instance, school searches conducted by a school police officer governed by a reasonable standard. And you go on and on, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, another North Carolina case, Wisconsin and Illinois, all of them go to this notion that an SRO or a school police officer is a school official if they are enforcing school rules.
So they have more latitude.
They have more
outside.
latitude. They have the reasonable
So
standard.
they're viewed in essence as an employee with a badge.
Yep.
Would be a simple way to
I
kind of sum
think that,
down.
yes, I think
So
that.
they're an employee
School.
first,
School.
and who happens to be an officer. Is that,
And there's much validity to what you say there, because in these cases that I looked at, great deference was given to the officer hired and employed by the school district. That was a big deal to the courts, because by default, by being an employee, they were acting in the best interest to maintain an educational process and enforce the rules and regulations of the
And
school.
one of the things that we can explore too, we're just scratching the surface with policy, is the authority given them by the district. I seem to remember, this will turn his crank and he'll start looking up law here in a second, but I had a band director call me who was on a trip, who suspected that there was drugs on the trip, and then there was a piece in the, I believe it was legislation and code that said if the person is authorized by the district to conduct search, there's reason, under the reasonableness piece. So I literally used those terms over the phone to her just in case anybody ever came back and said I'm using it. And this is going to sound weird. I authorize you to do this search, right? Because I was, and it was very simple. But so we might, that's something that we could put in policy and have.
Absolutely.
So it's a little bit different than an employee with the badge, because, I mean, in your teaching, role, it's not your realm
Right.
to do the search. But if you were on a trip, we could
It would be.
authorize you to do it, and you would seek the advice. But an officer would just carry that authorization with them, right? They would have, we could give them, say, because of your role, you're authorized, if it meets the reasonableness test, we can kind of train up on that, kind of talk about that piece. But they wouldn't need the probable cause
Right.
warrant that an outside police officer would. So-
Yeah.
Which is good and bad. Remember, that
Correct.
has
I
different
understand.
aspects to it.
Yeah.
There's what you want as an administrator, and then there's what you want as a parent.
And
Yeah.
could I ask
Yeah, no, it
a
just-
variation of this, and that is one of the things I'm trying to understand is, so you now have a principal and an educational mission of the school, and we have now a school police officer with the school department. There's a chief for the police officer, but the principal's in charge of the building. So how does the principal and the school police officer interact if it's a township police department when an issue comes up with a student in particular? That's my bigger
The
concern.
same way as current.
Yeah, and that's the advantage of writing the policy and procedure the way you want it, because currently our philosophy is we're a resource. To the that's from day one. That's the way we believed and the way we've worked it. The principal is the king or queen of the building, and we're going to provide law enforcement resources. I'll provide what resources, but ultimately that principal's responsible.
My second question partially covered my third, even though I think it's a little inconsistent with what we heard before on how much of a problem this has been. The number that I'm hearing tonight is woefully different, much different than what we heard. I thought the other night when it said, has this been a problem, was my question. It's been a problem, and it really didn't sound like it had been. So I have one question that's specifically focused on that. But my second question is this, and this is an attempt to give what sounds like it's going to be a recommendation pretty clearly, to attempt to give full chance at that recommendation. Is there an additional rationale, this was going to say, for the district starting its own police department that you're relying upon, administration's relying upon, other than the district being able to control its own staffing? And just give you a little bit of background on that. It seems like you want the folks who are in your building doing what you do in both roles, if you will, if I separate it, and I know you can't always separate things neatly, and this is a gross overstatement, but the fuzzy sweater guys that you want to get along with all the kids and know their names and do that very important function of kind of being the to use Mr. Deswaner's word, which I love, the lubricant that, keeps people kind of getting along, and you want that. But you also want, let's just be blunt, I mean, I don't go as far as the General Assembly and say let teachers carry guns and all kinds of crazy ass wacky ways to try to deal with the issue. But you also want, it seems to me, I know you have this training, I'm a little worried about I can foresee having school resource officers and police officers from other departments, kind of like we've been doing, and that's why I'm asking. You also want, in addition to the fuzzy sweater guys, which I'm not making fun of, I'm being sincere, you want people to get along, they don't look like police officers maybe. You also want the guy that has this level of training that I've seen provided by police departments who have big budgets for that kind of thing, that I don't know that you'd have in a well-intentioned school police department, even presided over by someone who's as careful as you, just because of resources. I mean, we fight all the time being able to do a single damn thing that we know that's important around here for lack of funding. And I want a police officer, I know they can still respond, which may be part of your answer, obviously from departments that are around, but I want an officer, if there's a, God forbid, a Columbine situation, I want the fuzzy sweater guys, but I also want a guy who can hit a target, I'm sorry to say it out loud, but with a threat, with a kid, anybody who has a weapon, I want somebody who can just say it, take a target out 9 times out of 10.
Those type of mass crisis situations, current situation or Washington Township Police Force would have the same response. I mean, there would be no difference in external response in a situation like that, current or the proposed.
I'm talking about acts of violence that don't go that far. Sure. The really bad fight that involves 6 or 7 young women or 6 or 7 young men. I'm concerned about the training, appreciating the fact that the statute seems to say you get the Indiana law enforcement, the basic, am I using the right term, the basic class, the 40 hours?
Well, it's beyond that.
Beyond that.
The basic is, 40 hours basically is, we call it pre-basic.
Okay, pre-basic.
And that's what special deputies get.
Okay.
The ILEA Academy is about 3 months, and it's on site there at ILEA. So it's much more involved. For instance, the IMPD Academy is 5 months because of all of the intricacies there. So the minimum academy, but that's what every officer in the state of Indiana has to have, is that equivalent. There's only 7 academies in the state, with ILEA being the main, IMPD, Fort Wayne, Evansville, and then IU has a few. So, but, and it's a good question, because it's one that I've been dealing with since we came up with the idea a few years ago, and I've been pretty fortunate because I've got several ideas working. And one of those ideas is with the Marion County Safe Schools Commission, and the SRO law, the debacle of that has really brought that forward, is why can't, with all the expertise we have in that room, why can't we offer training to our own members? So we're examining that. There is sorry I don't have the name of it, there is a consortium that is, and especially for small departments and school systems, it's wonderful. For $75 an officer per year, you can bring whatever trainers you want to in and get whatever training you need. But on top of that, for instance, going to the range and shooting, I'm working with Lieutenant Dale True over at IMPD because I want our officers training with IMPD because that's who's going to be coming in when bad things are happening. So if we're training with them, we're getting the same training they are as far as range qualifications, range training. They have to have 16 hours by statute, and so we're working on that. And I also have assurances. I met with Director of Public Safety Troy Riggs last month, and he assured whatever we would need that they would bend over backwards to help that out. Now again, that's initial stages of talk. That's not pen to paper and trying to figure out the nuts and bolts of everything. But they're about to start a new Sergeant's Academy. It's never been done before. And I applauded it because, they've done the Leadership Academy, and I think that's preparatory for leadership, but now they're going rank specific, which is wonderful. And they invited, any of our officers to attend. And that was just wonderful. So when they get it going, I'm going to send Dexter Crouch to that.
So you don't have to call an officer a sergeant in a local school police department to send them. You can send whoever you want. They'll just
yeah, according to, again, this was, a 30-minute conversation with the director, and I'm going to follow up because I've got some other items I'd like to talk with him about. But that conversation started. It started with the training academy about emergency vehicle operation training, for instance. We want to do that. Anything we can do in conjunction with IMPD, we'd like to do. Sheriff Layton has reached out and said, Brian, whatever you need, just let us know. I prefer IMPD, to be honest. I did the reserve thing with Marion County and found out real quick being a reserve is not, my reserve power is now with Cumberland, which is great because I do legal work for them. So my hours are cut way down from what they were.
I'm blown away when I see it. I represent a lot of police officers that have over the years, and I see their files, and I think they put lawyers to shame in terms of their continuing education from departments that have budgets to support it. Lawyers oftentimes show up at things. I'm not over-speaking of all lawyers, but they show up at things that don't really pertain to what they do. It's just something that's offered. It gets them their hours.
Gets them their hours,
they
exactly.
Sit in the back and drink a Coke, so I'm really impressed. And I say this for a reason because I want whoever's fulfilling that other function, to call it, a pretty big function, but police function, other than the things that we also need. We want the officers who run our schools every day, SROs by the former definition, to be obviously people that can deal with kids and know how to head things off and know how to give advice about drugs and problems and issues wherever they occur. But I also want the other folks to have the training and that's something that when I talk to police officers about this idea, they have some concerns about it. Now, I always try to look where somebody's interest is. Obviously, people have biases because of where they're coming from, so that's one. And then I'll pass.
No, that's and just let me add that we have a very good working relationship with all the officers in North District. I'm just ecstatic. For instance, we just started in with this new Interact reporting software that the city started, and we had a problem right off the bat, which I thought we would because of some our officers doing dual roles, and within a day I had 2 officers working on it from North District. They didn't have to do that, but I got a call this afternoon, hey, we got it fixed. So it's that kind of collaboration, especially with our North District neighbors. There's always going to be a professional rivalry and jealousy. That's the way we are as police officers, but it doesn't get in the way of, well, that's just Podunk, Washington Township. No, not if we're training with them. And additionally, I will say that our officers are always bugging me. I'd like to go to this training. I'd like to go to that training. They're very active about trying to find training, which I'm very gratified about that.
You anticipate that they will stay? In other words, another question that law enforcement asks me outside of the school law enforcement specific context is, you might have people come in, getting the basic training, et cetera, and then boogieing down the road.
It's a good question. I've been in communication with Dr. Ostrike about that, and we believe we can put together some sort of an employment contract that would allow a prorated return of salary should an officer leave, say 2 years. I know all of our officers are anxious for this to happen and they want to be here. They love Washington Township, and I just don't. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And just thinking about that concept, we have the same issue with professional staff. You know, we're going to give them level 1 IB training. That's a huge investment, and they could just leave us. Then, I mean, it's a constant struggle with professional staff, especially with the amount of professional development that we have. So it's something we deal with all the time.
I have a couple others, but if other people have one,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very marketable.
I'm guessing that you all have already done a budget analysis that looks at what we currently spend on security and then how that budget would look under the police department. If there's any of that you can share, that would be great. And I'm just curious if in that police department scenario, talking about the training and the retention question, would you anticipate there being any kind of differentiation? You talked about sergeant training, and obviously there's a lead school patrol officer, which sounds like you currently have already a
Right,
instructor.
yes.
And so is it very similar, or would you anticipate once you create more of a formal department as opposed to hiring folks who are reserve officers elsewhere, would you anticipate, you know, having to create ladders and opportunities for growth and increased salary or leadership rank in order to retain?
And answering that, and last to first, we've kind of built this with the lead SRO. Dexter Crouch is the pseudo supervisor at the moment. I'm going to have a staff meeting with my officers in May, and that's going to really start to be solidified, that he is the lead supervisor. In other words, he would be the sergeant or lieutenant. The department idea would be so small that you don't want, you know, I've seen, in fact, the ghosts that I fight from this place in the late 2000s, they had deputy chiefs. It was crazy. And, you know, when you're talking a 5 or 6,
Staff.
your span of control for a supervisor, it should be 4 or 5, and so really you really only need, you know, a lead executive and then probably 1 supervisor. So as far as a ladder, it may not be amenable to, you know, advancing up like a normal police department, but I'm not so sure that our current staff are looking toward that. Second, we've already reclassified and restructured the salaries in kind of in preparation of this. And the lead SRO obviously is paid about the same rate we pay our part-time officers, which I know it's an odd conundrum, but it kind of worked for us. And then our other officers that are a very competitive rate compared to other school police officers in central Indiana. So we're already there with that. I don't have to change anything. With regard to the budget, I was budgeted $850,000 for this school year, or give or take 1,000. Andy Frayne, our traffic control, is about a quarter of that. It's pretty extensive. Full-time personnel is but we do have substantial amounts in part-time personnel, and we're already starting to see, especially with the hiring of the grant officer, substantial chunks of part-time being reduced down. We're anticipating that if at current rates, we can absorb even the startup costs of this within our current budget, and then moving forward, those startup costs are gone. Now there are some maintenance costs, uniforms, and you know, whatnot, some types of equipment that you'd have to change. But for instance, bulletproof vests, would have to change those out every 5 to 7 years depending on the manufacturer. There's a federal grant for that to pay 75%. So there are other ways to supplement the budget with that. I've looked at the budget. I've looked at it with Amanda Brackett. I don't think we have to change anything with the budget.
I, however, as a follow-up, would like to see more on that, because I still think that there could potentially be, and I'm not an expert on insurance, there could be an insurance impact. I don't know how large a department you envision compared to what we have now. I certainly understand the difference between supplementing or cutting out the temporary hires, if you will, if you did have a department of X number of people, but I don't know how big you envision that being. Assume that the school district numbers stay flat, somewhere in the 10,500 to 11,000 plus range in terms of number of students. Same number of buildings, just as an assumption. We don't start purposefully admitting students who are also known felons, so the population doesn't change there. We don't start becoming a more fruitful atmosphere for drugs or whatever. I mean, everything pretty much stays the same. How big do you see the department getting?
Let me go to your first question. I've already talked to our insurance carrier directly about this when we first started considering this. There is little to no impact by doing this. And from what I described and talked with him about, I said, look, we're going to have professional policies and procedures that match other law enforcement agencies in place here. We're going to have standards, we'll have training, we'll have documentation of the training. Went through this whole litany that kind of what we're going through. And I said, look, the bottom line is, can we reduce our cost of insurance? And there's that possibility. So I feel very comfortable, and I probably could get that in writing from our insurance carrier, that should we do this, what would be the effect on our insurance rates. But I can say, after my conversation with him, that would be little to no effect as far as that. As far as the budgetary impact and number of personnel, the addition of the grant position helped us, and we're hoping, based on anecdotal evidence, we think via Homeland Security this is going to stay a while. We just applied, obviously, for the second year of that, and hopefully we wrote that well enough and should be getting that and get that for the next several years. The question becomes, we have one other position that literally is a full-time position, and we've been very fortunate because we've had a reserve officer in that position, and we've kept her right at about 39 hours and not above that 40-hour threshold. And she has run our district and handled anything that's come out on the district at the elementaries, has become literally the elementary school SRO, because she does daily visits to the elementaries, problem solves, troubleshoots. Today worked with Medallia Bolin on a residency issue, truancy issue. So we have that ability. So the reason I say that is that something we can explore down the road, 2015 maybe, as adding that as a full-time position. But that's the only real consideration that we're giving. I mean, we're at 2 at the high school, where I think is a really good number. We've got those officers staggered, so we have coverage in the building literally from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., which is wonderful. And then each middle school has their own and uses them at special events and schools. So that's not going to change. When I first started here in 2010, it was amazing because I walked in and our police department was in the transportation building. And when I walked in there literally were 10 or 11 officers sitting around the office. And it was like I came in the middle of the night, turned the light on, the cockroaches just went. And I thought, this is July. Why do we have 11, 12 officers working here? What are they doing? And as we read their policies and procedures, or their procedures, it was just amazing. They were doing things that were just outside the realm of school policing. So, and by the way, that was one of the consultants' dings on the whole process. So we looked at that and said, we don't need to be doing certain things. We need to be doing school policing, and that's using a community policing model. Okay, so let's do it that way. And that let us, we don't need all these people. So we started letting go people quite rapidly. So with that kind of background, I don't see us growing, maybe by one person. Now, if the school board or the administration, sees a need or entertains another need, then yeah. But from my standpoint, from what I'm seeing, we're operating pretty good right now.
The other question I have that's not covered, we're just reading it verbatim, so please forgive the rough edges if you've already covered a little bit of this, which maybe we have a little bit. How will the district having its own police department be better or different for our students? The literature I've reviewed and the folks I've spoken with regarding police officers' interactions with children in a school setting seems to focus on officers or SROs' understanding of what's different about a school setting, rather than whether the officer is part of a department, which is separate from the school district, what they're called, if they're called police officer, sir, SRO, what have you, and without regard for their affiliation. You know, aren't we currently doing a good job with this, apart from the issue that you've mentioned tonight on controlling our own workforce, as far as hiring or training officers who appreciate what's different or unique about a school setting? So really two questions.
And it's a question well taken, because as I do my walk-arounds at the schools and see our SROs interacting with our students, I love what I see. I've got kids coming up to our officers.
It's night and day from where we've come from.
Yeah, it's so gratifying to see that. It's like, okay, my officers are getting it, they understand it, so that point's well taken. What can change? I think one of the biggest things, besides the staffing and the manpower and those issues we've discussed, is the development of procedures directly associated with policing in a school environment. We're no longer held hostage to IMPD, and because I can't tell an officer not to wear a taser nor to use a taser. If they are equipped by that agency and trained by that agency, they can use it. Is that an ugly scenario? Yeah. I don't want to be on the Indianapolis Star front page with that, but writing your own procedures, for instance, on use of force, then you write out you don't put tasers in there.
Good concrete example.
So that's one example of writing procedures specifically, and I think I've given some examples in the packet I presented to the school board of what we're trying to do professionally and a lot of this, admittedly, is mirroring what other successful agencies have done. It's no use reinventing the wheel. Let's do, and then take what they have or what we've learned, and also use what other successful school districts, Pike, Brownsburg, Center Grove, who I've been in, they're probably tired of hearing from me by now, but putting and infusing those educational related goals into those procedures. So that's one thing I think you get, one big thing you get out of it is the control you get over your personnel and keeping them reined in as educational employees rather than police officers who happen to work in an educational facility. Second is the training. There's certain mandatory training that a police officer has to have, domestic violence, bloodborne pathogens, on and on and on. But if I want to hire an officer, IMPD, Marion County, they may not have dealing with non-crisis intervention or defensive tactics.
Autism.
Right. Now, now state law mandates autism spectrum disorder training, but now I can go a step further. I can say, okay, here's beyond autism. Here's how we would intervene in a non-crisis mode. Here's how we would intervene if defensive tactics, or I may be speaking out of school on this, but defensive tactics or especially with the seclusion and restraint law that's come through, this stuff's not being taught at IMPD, but we can take and do those specialty trainings. We can take, I'll be sending 2 officers in the summer to the Indiana School Resource Officers Conference, and they'll be taking advanced SRO. So we'll be well beyond basic, which is required by law. We'll be on top of that with advanced SRO training. So that's another advantage. Another advantage is right now I can apply for one maybe 2 funding streams, and one's very difficult. The other one we should be okay on. But we're looking at 7 or 8 different funding streams: Bulletproof Vest, the Burn JAG grant, all kinds of block grants. They're specifically related to being a law enforcement agency. So again, that helps mitigate a little bit of our budget, maybe helps us with our training, but gives us a little bit more oomph, so we're not relying so much on tax dollars to go to the schools. It may be a small drop in the bucket, but still it's better than what we're operating with right now.
It's the part that makes me excited, but it also worries me. Whenever we're talking grants, I'm excited to get them.
I know. And I totally understand that, because I'm dealing with this Indiana Safe and Secured School Grant. I just did the quarterly report on that, and because of their delay in funding, we weren't able to hire an officer till March. So I had January and February I couldn't spend, but they wanted the first quarter, which, objectives, which I put down, some of them as 0, because we haven't got to start on it yet. They said, well, you can't put a 0 down on it. What do you mean I can't put a 0? I haven't had a chance to work on it.
Part of it, I feel like I'm wrestling a kind of a greased watermelon, because we're talking SRO, it keeps slipping out of my hands. We're talking about SROs and we're talking about officers. And I see the folks who work with our kids in the most intimate level as being SRO-like, to use the old definition. And they require special training, and I get it. But I don't know why that has to change from what we've been doing, aside from having somebody like you who's really focused on training, which is the key thing. Understanding that you also want somebody with possibly a different skill set coming to your school, and maybe part of the answer is that they're going to come anyway. I've got to think that through.
I'm sitting here wondering whether it's semantics with SRO versus officer, because I think what I'm hearing here tonight is Mr. Klaus is telling us that whether we use the term SRO or officer, pick one or the other. It doesn't matter. It's what's behind that relative to the training
Yeah.
that is the critical piece in this.
So to a teacher, to a staff member at North Central, would they know the difference between now and Washington Township
Right.
Police Force in the day-to-day functioning? No.
No.
Maybe on the label or the uniform, yes, but the day-to-day functioning is going to look similar to just a general staff member in the school.
Yeah, I understood that from Mr. Smith's presentation, and that's part of what a couple of my questions have said. What really matters is the training you give and what people do,
Right.
as opposed to what you call them. I'm assuming that, but I'm still saying I think there are different skill set people that you're looking for depending upon the circumstances. In other words, I don't know why that has to change. That's what I'm trying to understand, is because if you have people that are doing the SRO thing, and then you also have other people that you hire for North Central graduations or football games where there's unfortunately in the world that we live in, fights that can break, all the stuff that comes with school populations that aren't policed that may come here or whatever, so that's what I'm trying to wrangle through here.
And it's a point well taken. And I appreciate, Dr. Hill, what you said, because obviously in the case I quoted, they used police officer, SRO, it was interchangeable. So I think the semantics is exactly right. I think we're giving an additional skill set because like I said, there's mandated training by the state as a police officer you must have. Domestic violence and bloodborne pathogens and all of this other stuff. But so we're getting that, but now we can additionally train. I'm not held hostage to IMPD schedule, or I'm not held hostage by park ranger schedule, because now I can, okay, we'll hold off on that training. We don't have to do it. But here's an opportunity we have with specialty training, with things that deal with the roles of a police officer in a school setting.
I get that, but what I see a regular officer. I think the assumption you're making is regular officer in any other department gets pre-basic or whatever, and then they're out, and then we get pre-basic and all this other stuff. The problem is the files that I see from a lot of other police officers, they're like,
no,
amazing
and
training.
Yeah, and I'll give you, for instance, that do I need an officer in a school-based setting that is trained in hostage negotiations? Probably not, because if something happens, I'm going to be calling the big dogs to come in. And so they may have hostage, and we don't. They may have armor school where they can work on a Glock 40 caliber weapon in the field and field strip and repair. They have other training that is non-school related, and that's what you see because of all the training that's out there and is offered. Now, granted, there's active shooter training. We just cooperated with the School Safety Specialist Academy and used Wyandotte. We're involved in that. Police officers, school administrators, everybody was involved in that. But that's the crisis mode training that I think everybody's doing, which is great because you want everybody collaborating and on the same page. So that's why you see this mountain of training on an officer. I'm just saying that we can still have that kind of training, but then specialize the way we need to with, educational. I may have an officer come in from the street, and what I'm gratified is, for instance, a football game, have a kid that gets in trouble. For the most part, my officers that are working part-time who are street officers, but they're well-versed in community policing, they know to turn that over to one of our school resource officers. They know arrest is not the preferred outcome. They know we can do more administratively with these kids than the criminal justice system ever thought about doing. So with regards to that, we've been fortunate, but you know, when I bring that street officer in, there's no guarantee that, okay, I'm done with him, lock him up, gone. And that's not exactly what we're after. And I may be kind of going off on a tangent there, but I'm trying to give some illustration to that.
But what I would also say is, I have to admit, I did not see all these documents that were posted under the study session that you have out there now. And these documents help me a lot to understand, because before that's what we were looking for, some of these answers. But my question is a little different in that you had a lot of questions asked about, well, you know, what is the difference, why do we need to do it, et cetera, which I also agree with some of those. My question is this: with every situation, I don't care what program or whatever you're going into, there's some certain things that aren't going to be as you think go. What is wrong with, what could be wrong with having a police, your own police force? What could be the downside?
Downside would be improper leadership and proper oversight, as we saw what happened in the late 2000s here. I will commend this board for having such an intense interest in this. I will commend current administration because how often do we talk or text? So I'm sure that's...
I preferred to get a call from Klaus, but I do take them.
I get this, but...
What's next?
Yes.
Better to know than not.
So, the oversight is much better, and at the risk of being self-aggrandizing, I think the leadership's a little bit better. So, with that, you're a little bit insulated, but those are things that can go wrong. Improperly written procedures that are not vetted or done as a knee-jerk reaction to a situation. Obviously, good policies, good procedures are developed in collaboration with subject matter experts. The personnel's trained to those policies and procedures. You evaluate the policies and procedures if they're being followed, and then you review and redraft whatever you need to do. So if you keep that cycle, you're insulating yourself from that problem, but it is you know, a possible downfall of it. You have a downfall of without proper supervision of officers. I'm going to say this wrong, but going on a kind of a rogue, spree.
Going Barney 5.
Yeah, going Barney 5. Again, though, with proper selection criteria, which now we're really developing really well. We just had a standard, the grant position, for instance, we kind of upped the standards a little bit. And we had a standardized oral interview that was scored from a score of 0 to 8, about 12 questions, situational, those type of things.
Do a psychological test too?
That will be coming.
Yeah.
That will be
That's
part.
every department I've had anything to do with does a
Yeah.
That
very
will
good
be it.
psychological test.
We use MMPI. There might be some additional costs with that, but well absorbed within our current budget, I think. So yes, that's something that Tom Ostrike and I, in fact, we're supposed to meet next week. It's one of the things I want to bring up. When we do this, or if we do this, can then we reclassify our officers and require them to go through this new screening? Because I think that would be very necessary, because we want to stay with the best practices of police departments, especially smaller police departments across the country.
Yeah, I don't give a damn about their feelings. I mean, I think that's a necessity. That would be a big one for me.
Yeah,
Because
and I'm
Which is a requirement of your liability insurance.
yeah, and then that's obviously, with my background, I'm all about how can I decrease the exposure to liability for the township? How can I do that?
Well, let me follow up, because this kind of ties to what you just said as one of the I guess the negatives, if you would. Mr. Klaus won't be here forever. New board may be installed. Nobody on the board is an officer. We need to hire your position, or whoever's on the board needs to hire your position. How do we know, how is a board that's maybe newly constituted, I mean, everybody's gone, let's say, you're no longer with us, you happen to leave, how does, in the past, because we had SROs that we hired from reserves, all the person had to do is come in and make sure we hired the right, but now you're running a department. So where in the procedures or guidelines, wherever it may go, it says, how do we hire your position?
I think first of all, we will put in place good procedures, and I don't like saying policy because I know the school board does policy, but I know the reality of that. So good policies and procedures that you put in place in collaboration with the superintendent, cabinet, subject matter experts, in collaboration with the school board. So that's your first insulator for that. Second, you create a job description that is fluid, that is not a rote, off the internet job description. You put in those qualities and characteristics that you know will succeed, and stick to those and adhere to those and make those the standard. You make a selection process through the superintendent and the cabinet that puts the right criteria forward. I remember when I hired in for this job, I was very impressed because there was a very large oral interview board. I was kind of blown away because in 2006 I was up for the Greenwood Police Chief job. I was thinking about retiring then, and walked into a 15-member oral interview board, and it was impressive. So imagine walking into this situation that Jim Ravilli had put together with about 10 or 12 educational leaders from all across the district. And that was intense because if I walked into a police interview, I've dealt with that. That's old hat. Yeah, nerves, but yeah, I've dealt with that. That's okay. I was on a totally different level with this because these were educated, dedicated people in an educational realm that weren't used to law enforcement. So, and I say that because that was the right way to go. There were selection criteria put in place. It could be made even better. So if done in collaboration with what we're learning in this position, with current administration, with the school board, I think you insulate yourself really well by putting criteria in place, putting a job description that's fairly standard but is fluid to the needs of the township, and then you put the right policies and procedures in place, and you should have strong continuity.
Let me give you worst case scenario. Say the board approves the forming of this, it's formed and it goes awful. How quickly can you dissolve that, or what's the process to terminate it on the other end?
Resolution by the school board to terminate. That's it.
So if that doomsday or that worst case scenario occurred,
You as a board.
There would have been a lot of upfront costs, because you said the transition costs would be fairly minimal.
I've been piecing together cost. I went, actually, while I was on vacation in Kentucky, went by a nationally known law enforcement store and priced some things out while I was down there. So I didn't put it on my time card.
sad.
Was that when you were on the phone with me when I was requesting the video? When you were on vacation, we were working?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Just checking.
Yeah, I also want to say the information provided in the zip file was really helpful to get a sense of the
Good.
kinds of policies and procedures that you put together. One request with 2 documents. Would it be possible to get us Word versions of the proposed board resolution and the proposed
Oh, absolutely,
policy?
yeah.
Because I would just appreciate the opportunity to think by drafting, which is how my brain
Let me say
works.
one thing too, because this was very clear when we sat down on policy the other day. This is the first time this was presented to us, and it's presented like a policy that we're going to adopt when we have just been discussing this. And I said at the time, not trying to be critical, but I don't remember a vote. I don't remember this is a policy that there are other things that we still need to get done that we've talked about, a policy that we need to facilitate it or what have you. So it's useful, as a tool to think about it, but there's an awful lot of other things I'd want to see personally too. So
Absolutely. But I thought it was that good first step before
Yeah.
we were asking for
And-
what
and-
might this look like, and how would we delineate those powers the statute gives us? What powers do we want to grant, or what powers do we want to deny? And it started that discussion, and I think that's
And that's, and I'll give kudos to Dr. Milliman. I really appreciate his leadership because I have learned over the past 10 to 12 months more about education than I had in the first 3 years. So I really appreciate that. And one of those things was suggesting the employee handbook. And I had taken a step further and actually made it a parent handbook. And he said, no, 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 make that an officer handbook, which it made total sense. I knew where he was coming from then. The school board policy was just a starting point, but this thing is, I think, a work of beauty because it takes some of the best school board policies regarding school police departments in the state, meshes them all together, and then puts our own unique and I think specific spin on it. So I think I understand it. It's maybe I should have left the edits in there to make it look as if this is a work in progress. I kind of gave it to you as a clean version, but
We kind of understood that. Getting
Yeah, there's much.
Yeah, we understood. It was,
Just to give you
Okay.
a feel and
No,
idea.
we didn't.
I didn't want to make. I want to make sure I wasn't dictating.
No,
No,
Absolutely not. My point was that
absolutely
we don't
not,
often
Brian.
get like, oh, here's a policy and now we should become a Soviet school kind of. And my point
Right,
is,
right.
we don't usually have a lot of discussion and then there's kind of a, yeah, we're on board with this, let's develop a policy. So my point was just that I recognize where we are,
Right.
and I hope we all recognize where we are. That was all I was saying.
Okay.
in the policy meeting.
And so we'll get the. I just did that for expediency of size of the
Yeah,
file. So.
yeah.
and we knew.
And this is a very minor question, so if anybody has other big picture questions, you could answer this offline. But one of the draft SOPs in there, the one for school police officer, actually defines SRO within it. And I was trying to.
And I'll have to
understand-
change that now because
Okay,
of the
thank you. I was-
because of the
so that's
Senate
part
bill.
of the drafting process. Okay, I was trying to understand why you had.
Even though it says August, I put an August 1st date on there because I had to put a date in the field, and so I've got to go back now and kind of readjust that with what we've determined under Senate Bill 85.
I haven't read the whole school police law, but maybe you know this, and you've focused on this already, which would be helpful. Does the law that you said about 10 years old now, does that specifically cross-reference or say anything about immunities that are provided to police officers and the others in the immunity statute?
Privileges and immunities afforded constables or sheriffs,
So,
which is nice.
Yeah, that's right, okay. I want to see if we're losing anything. I don't want to lose a defense because I didn't think to ask.
And that's a good point. I should have brought it up. Yes, yeah, positively is under privileges and immunities of constables and sheriffs, which helps us. I didn't say municipal police officers, I don't know, but.
And one other thing just to keep in mind, every time I read, the statute specifically talks about the school police department officer being able to arrest anyone for any offense. And I know that's evidently a legal term of art, but if we put that in something like a board resolution or board
Any
policy.
arrestable defense you mean?
I'm just wondering if there's another way we can phrase that for the layman that doesn't make it sound as if you look at me wrong.
Right.
And- And
Proverbial
again,
gum wrapper on the street.
I'll leave that to,
and again, that was,
if we go forward.
the whole gamut was thrown in there, because I started out with looking at all the school board policies we have, and most of them are about a paragraph and a half. And so I kept it at that initially.
I'm the one that
And,
actually linked it. We're not done yet.
and we're not done yet.
Yeah.
So this has been a collaboration with myself, Mr. Smith, and Dr. Milliman, and it's gradually expanded. But there are things in there that you could simply say, have all the powers granted under 2026-16. And it's non-threatening language all of a sudden. Yeah. But this, it tells you right there, this is what you have at your fingertips.
One follow-up question, and again, I ask this from a positive place, but I need to be honest and say that this is a nagging thing for me that's bothering me. My summary, and one of the questions that I forwarded, if you look back at the question, you'll see that was kind of one of the things I was thinking about when the question was, what I remember that we were told previously, I don't want to be the guy on the board that goes back and listens to tapes and that kind of thing, so I'm asking. My memory of what we were told previously was that although this has been a concern, finding people and covering positions, and if there's I don't want to call it a state funeral, but if there's a funeral of an officer, which I can understand officers from other departments wanting to go, and I get that. And my memory was that I was told, well, it's been a concern frequently, but it's not been a problem before. Okay? Has it cost us any money? I understand there are things I do every day at work that I'm always, every day I leave and I go, my God, I can't believe that didn't roll over me this time. You know, scheduling something, a hearing, whatever. Has it cost us any money? Or, you know what I'm saying, has it had a detrimental effect, or is it something you're just trying to safeguard it happening in the future as far as the big rationale for this?
Yeah, besides the manpower coverage, we do try to cover those officers' position with part-time. It's actually at a higher pay rate than the normal SRO. So, for instance, I had park rangers sent Officer Crouch to a 5-day evidence school, which, well, that benefits us. That's great, but I lost him for 5 days. He's the lead SRO at the high school.
If we wanted him to have that training, we would have sent him in the summer.
Yeah, and so we did our best piecemealing it, but so the bottom line was, yeah, it cost us extra. Anytime we have an officer missing, I'm not going to leave that school uncovered.
Yeah, I understand.
So I'm going to hire, now I've got a luxury right now because, for instance, Officer Robinson at Eastwood, his mother suffered what was an apparent stroke this morning. It since hasn't been, but she's fairly seriously ill. He missed. I had the luxury of sending the second SRO at the high school that we just hired under the grant out there to temporarily take over. Now, he had something to do at 4 o'clock and couldn't be there for dismissal. So I had the district officer go over and cover. So it does present challenges when officers go on leave. And our officers have been real good, speaking of leave, about taking majority leave on the breaks or during the summertime and not leaving us too vulnerable to that. You're going to get that in any profession you're in. But the short answer to the question, yes, we've taken a budgetary hit of some degree, and I'd have to go back and examine over the last year how many times that happened, but you know, at $24.09 an hour, I've got to pay that part-time officer to cover. So I'm paying the officer's salary if it's, and what we do is, I had an officer that wanted to go to motorcycle training. I said, well, you take a vacation and do it on your own. That's not benefiting us. But if I've got an officer that wants to go to evidentiary, or his department wants to send him, that benefits us because now I've got an officer on staff that can do the investigation and do all the evidentiary things and establish chain of custody, everything that needs to go with that in a proper way. But I've got to cover that. So, you know, $24.09 an hour starts adding up after a while.
And could you anticipate that it would be a retention positive?
That's what I was asking.
If you're not hiring reserve officers, they don't have to do those reserve duties. They can be an employee of the
All
police
of them
department.
to a T. Every officer has told me, we want to do this because we don't want to be a reserve.
So it would help us to.
We want to be Washington Township.
Yeah. I mean, it's like working a full-time job and then having to volunteer 30, 40 hours.
And I can tell you because I did this in
That's a lot.
2012 with Marion County. I thought, brilliant, you know, bright me, I'll get with Leighton, I'll do this and.
But they're under severe budget crunches and really using you.
And they're really, I mean, I was putting 40, 45 hours a month in and it was killing me
Yeah,
because,
it's a lot.
I'll be honest, something had to give and this place had to give. And that's not right. You're not paying me to, you know, have less attention to details here. So I had to change that affiliation and change that. And I can't even imagine what the officers are having to do. They don't complain about it. And I've been fortunate because they could pretty much complain about
And
that.
the 5 current SROs are 12-month employees, and under a police department, your proposal is that they would be as well, right?
Well, the current way we have it is 3 of the officers are year-round. The grant position, and I'm really questioning my judgment on this, is a 10-month or 215-day position. Because we hired him late, I'm cheating that a little bit because the money's there in the grant, I might as well spend it. So we're going to use him a little bit this summer. The West Lane officer is also a 215-day employee. And he wanted that because he has his own business on the side that is busy during the summer. So we could continue that, or it would be at the pleasure of the board and pleasure of the superintendent how we want to proceed. Do we want to make them all year round? I merely did that as a money-saving effort.
I was going to say, I think that would be on you to manage the budget.
Yeah.
Personally,
Yeah.
I'd like to see that done as efficiently
Yeah,
as
sure.
possible.
Well, I'd still like
While
to see-
having an effective force.
I'd still like to see what you said you wanted also, though, is some sort of
Budget
projection about this,
comparison.
other than just,
Yeah.
because this is kind of what I think respectfully we heard from Mr. Smith, it's going to be around the same. I mean, we ask for the kind of projection for other things that are important, and I think this is no less important. Arguably, it's more important.
But what I'd like to do then is I'll put together the initial costs and where that money would come from under the current budget. It'll be pretty easy. I know where it's going to come from. And then kind of a projection of keeping the same budget, but where would we, for instance, instead of buying uniforms every year, do what other departments do and issue a uniform allowance in the form of a stipend, whatever amount that is, then we'd come up with. But then the officers would be responsible for updating their, carrying an update of their uniforms and equipment and that type of thing.
I will say that we've got, we're almost at 10 o'clock. We did not expect closure of this topic tonight. We knew, based upon the amount of questions, we knew things that he's still working on. So this isn't a closure, and it's not going to be an action item on May 14th by any means. So I think that we could, if you're okay, work with President Turner to design what the next step is. Does the board want it again as an info item, another study session? What is the next step? Obviously, we're not close to an action item by any means. So I didn't want tonight to feel comprehensive and I got to get it all talked about because it's coming as an action item May 14th. It is not. We know there's lots to be resolved.
We're okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
It would help me to get the Word versions. Of
Okay.
I'll have those to Cheryl Sutton in the morning.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect.
And just out of curiosity, the district would purchase the firearms for the force, right?
Yes.
And are you anticipating that would only be sidearms, I'm assuming?
Sidearms,
We're not gonna-
I mean, I'm not going to, I know what law enforcement trends are, school policing trends are, and there are certain agencies doing that. I'm not going to push for that. It's an idea. I mean, it's worthy of discussion at some point, not right now. So, I mean, I have IMPD, I have North District. Again, when stuff's coming down,
Yeah.
I'm calling the big dogs in.
All right. And then, given if we had a police department, they wouldn't have the reserve duties. And given the quantity of police officers that often do off-duty work to supplement incomes, and knowing we wouldn't be the highest paying police department around, I'm assuming your standard operating procedures would also include a process for governing any off-duty work that
It could be,
police officers do.
it could be prohibited, it could go from prohibition all the way to allowing it in certain extreme circumstances.
And that would be another question, I guess, that would be dependent upon the liability, right? If we're the grantor of their law enforcement authority and they were working off-duty, do we have some liability for that?
Exactly, and you can cure that through an off-duty work agreement that requires the entity to fully cover those
And
type
that's
of
just the
things.
kind of question that kind of gets to what I think we all share, and Mr. Turner mentioned tonight, which is, this is just, I keep struggling with, okay, it's a district, we hire all sorts of people, bus drivers, right, and they just let you do that, and transportation does it, and it's just the thought of adding a group of employees that in some respects, sure, they're just like cafeteria workers with health department requirements, or bus drivers and driving requirements, and yet you carry a sidearm.
Right, right.
You got the idea
Different layer.
of pursuit and the use of sirens and all that kind of stuff, and it kind of boggles our minds.
It's not quite the same as a bus driver driving
How do
a
we make
cab
sure
in
we
the off,
manage that
in the off
appropriately?
hours. Not the same thing.
Yeah, and hopefully we address that a little bit about, the
Yeah.
proper procedures, proper policies, good leadership, which you all are exhibiting with this inquiry, so.
I'll say too, there are things I want to talk about to be comprehensive. I mean, it's kind of what you do as a lawyer, right? I mean, you know this as a lawyer yourself. My client wasn't there. And if my client was there, I didn't mean to hurt your client. I mean, it kind of, in the alternative. So I'm interested in talking about these things, but I can tell you, assuming that the board wanted to go this direction, I think the balance of what's policy and what's administrative guidelines or SOPs, this board member thinks it's not all going to be SOPs. I think that's how you lose control over something as a board, since we're supposed to be the folks that are responsible for this ultimately. as community members, I think that's how a board gets in trouble. So I don't think everything becomes, with obviously the advice and consent of folks, as you say, who have specialized knowledge. I mean, it's important to me. I asked people when I went to the Council of School Attorneys meeting, attorneys, I said, with no hard edge to it, I just said, we have some discussions, our board is public, we talked about it publicly. I said, tell me what you think about something like a school police department. And these are attorneys who, they can have their own biases and prejudices like we all do, but they said they can't understand why somebody would want to do it if they weren't forced to do it. Because even if the law permits it, because it creates so many problems and so many issues for board and there are issues of liability. But you've done a great amount of work, which I appreciate, and everything that you presented, like some other folks have said, I think it's been very helpful, so thank you for that.
Something else that's interesting as I try to weigh all this stuff too is IPS has had a police department since
long time.
Yeah, 90, well, actually, no.
And I guess I take
When I was in high school, they
I
had
take a
officers.
little reassurance from the fact that in all those years, I don't recall too many big media stories about large issues. So there's maybe some solace in there.
If I can keep officers from tripping kids going onto a football field, it'll be okay.
And if you, yeah, exactly.
I think what everybody's saying is if the decision among the five of us is to go this direction, we just want to make sure we do it professionally and correctly.
Sure,
I
absolutely.
mean, that's what I think, that's where we're all floating in, at least I am.
And I can appreciate that.
It's a big step.
It is.
Because I'm beholden to you and beholden to this administration that, gave this old retired guy a chance at, creating something pretty special here, and my heart and soul's into it, so, obviously.
And I believe that my vote can't be based on that. So,
I know.
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
I know.
I can care about you as a person and think you're doing a great job, and again, we have to struggle mightily as school board members not to evaluate somebody at a
But
board
that means that I'll be working.
Yes, absolutely.
to assuage
but
those.
My only counterpoint to what Mr. Deswiner just said, yes, it's true IPS has done this, but nobody the hell else has done it, or not very many school districts. That's the counter to that. There's always a counter, right? And so I think there's a lot here to weigh.
Yes.
My comments may suggest that I've made up my mind. I've not, but there's a lot.
And I would say I really appreciate Phil Smith and Brian Klaus
Yeah.
thinking outside of the box for the whole district and looking at something different to even say, can we take a look at this? When top district leadership says that about their department or their division that they oversee, we as a cabinet vet that, and if it's an idea that we think it's worthy enough to move forward, then it obviously comes to the board as an info item, so.
And if there's any way with this that we can reduce the amount we spend on security for car transport to schools so that we can then redirect that cash to something like North Central High School graduation challenges.
Massive operation every day.
That would be ideal.
Yeah.
That's a lot
And
of
they do a
financial
great job.
questions about moving to
No
police
further,
department.
since we're going to continue this conversation, obviously. Any last word
Good night.
Last one for the evening. no.
for this meeting? Okay? All
Thank
right.
you, Mr.
Yeah,
Klaus.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Roman.
Thank you, board.
Everyone.
Thank you.
I know it won't be your last one for the night.